and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about navigating fan fiction for beginners. Mind the tags. But before we dive into that topic, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with JL.
Hi, I'm Gail Gribble. I'm a urban fantasy, alternate history, speculative fiction, however you want to describe it, writer. I started reading fanfic when I discovered the internet when I was years old, and I've been reading it ever since. I got my start as a writer of writing fanfic, and I still enjoy reading it, and I write it, and I won't tell you what my pen name is, but it's up on AO3.
All right, Carole.
I'm Carole Stokes. I've been a fan of Supernatural since season 3. I started writing fanfic in 2012, and I'm still chugging along.
Hanna.
I'm Hanna Kenzie. I am a romance author. I write queer, paranormal, historical, and contemporary romance, mostly MM, but not exclusively. And I started watching Supernatural in season 1. I did hold off on reading Supernatural fanfic until about, I think, 2017, because I was afraid that once I went down that rabbit hole, I'd never be able to claw my way out. But I did read a crap ton of Buffy fanfiction back in the late 90s and early aughts.
Okay, Melissa.
I'm Melissa. I am a fan fiction stalker. There are several writers that I like. They publish something, and I'm right there before they've even finished hitting the publish button. However, they make it on AO3.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, man-made paranormal romance. But all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I fell in love with Supernatural halfway through season 11, binge watched all 11 seasons in time for the beginning of season 12. During the hiatus between seasons, I decided I just couldn't do without my fix, so I started reading Supernatural fan fiction, went down that rabbit hole, then discovered Slash, went down that rabbit hole, read hundreds and hundreds of fictions, popped my head up, said, gee, I wonder what the non-fandom stuff looks like, read hundreds of those, said, this is just too much fun, and that's where Morgan Bryce was born. So, how did you get into reading or writing fanfic whenever that happened for you? Carole?
I got into reading fanfic before my Supernatural fandom. I had a couple of friends on LiveJournal who were big Yowie fans and turned me on to some Yowie. And then I started reading fanfic for like Stargate Atlantis. I can't watch the rest of Stargate Atlantis now because it's not like the fanfic. I read Suits fic without ever watching Suits, and I never will now. But the big one for me was at the end of season 3, because it ended so abruptly due to the writer's strike. And I thought, oh gosh, now what am I going to do? And then I thought, wait a minute, there was all that great fic for those shows. I bet there's some for Supernatural. So that was it. I was reading it, and then it was a couple of years later. I have often had the urge to write, not always had the situation or circumstances to write. I was the kind of person, if we had to do any kind of creative writing assignment, I was like, yes. You know, everyone else is like, no. And I'm like, give it to me, give it to me. So I was like, I wonder if I could do this. And I've been doing it ever since.
Okay.
Right. And still reading it.
How about you, Hanna?
Well, like I said, my first deep dive into fan fiction was in the late 90s and early aughts when I was still watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I fell into the rabbit hole of Angel Spike fan fiction in the early days of fanfic on the internet, when stories were posted on GeoCities websites and places like that. I was in law school at the time and working. I was an evening law student, and I was working during the day, and I was just crushed under just an unbearable level of stress and fanfic, reading fanfic, particularly the angsty, deeply smutty Spike and Angel fanfic was my escape from the rest of my day life. And then like I said, I held off on diving into supernatural fanfic because I had experienced that falling into the rabbit hole with Buffy fanfic. And so I held off as long as I could, but I was having trouble writing and, staying sort of inspired by writing, and jumped into supernatural fanfic, and that kind of brought my Ready mojo back.
Okay. How about you, Melissa?
The mute button is evidently hard today. I read some fanfic on LJ back in the Lost days. I didn't read really much anything else, but I did read fanfic for Lost. And then I sort of put it aside. I was reading, and then, became obsessed with Supernatural the minute it started. But I didn't dive into fanfic until you dragged me into it. Because you were like, hey, here are some really cool stories. And the cool thing about it is not only do I have great stories and I think the current to be read list is like 700 plus, but I've also made friends because, I've also made friends with some of the authors, and so I'm very happy, and I'm never climbing out of this rabbit hole. I'm very glad that Supernatural has such a rich world, and people are constantly finding new angles to play with, and that's just cool.
I started writing fan fiction back in high school, obviously long before Supernatural, and also before LiveJournal and the internet. So we would go to Star Trek and Star Wars conventions with our handwritten, typed, mimeographed, or Xeroxed fan fictions, and sit all along the wall and around the furniture in somebody's room and take one, pass it down, take one, pass it down. And we'd spend all night reading, because otherwise you couldn't get it unless you got like somebody's fanzine, which was incredibly expensive because it had to pay for not only the shipping, but the Xeroxing. But that taught me that I could write and entertain people, and that I could keep people happy with stories. And then I got away from that because, college, kids, work, and I didn't really come back to reading fanfic until that break between season 11 and 12. Nothing had really captured my heart the way Supernatural did. And I'm just so in love with the richness and the depth and the variety. You want fluff, you can get fluff. You want angst, you can get angst. You want shipping, you can get it. You want non-shipping, you can get it. Anything you're in the mood for, you can find. I do write some flash fic, illustrated by the wonderful Carole for the Winchester Family Business, where I'm a staff columnist. But otherwise, I'm pretty much of a reader these days. But I am deeply grateful to all those wonderful writers out there. How about you, Gail?
I spontaneously invented fanfic when I was 12, and then a year later I got on the internet in the late 90s and realized, oh, these people are already doing this. And so that's how I got started writing and reading fanfic in the days of Highlander fandom, when everything was on GeoCities and weird web forums. And that's when I started writing, and those were my first readers, and that kind of launched me into studying English in college and then going to grad school for creative writing. College and grad school, and a little bit after grad school, though that was because of World of Warcraft, I kind of fell out of fanfic. And then when I got back to it was the early days of AO3. And I tried to clean up some of my stuff from high school, but I had just moved so far beyond that I was mostly a pretty serious reader instead for a few years, and I still am. But then the Old Guard came out 2 years ago, and that like lit my fanfic senses on fire. And that's mostly what I've been writing since. The thing about fanfic that always appealed to me the most is the fact that crossovers are a thing in fanfic. And so I won't say that I've read a lot of supernatural fanfic, but I've read a lot of stuff that happens to have also like included supernatural fanfic. I think some of the best supernatural fic I've ever read was a crossover between the Buffyverse and the Harry Potter verse. And that was just amazing. I don't know that I've read any supernatural Old Guard fanfic, but I'll have to see if there's any there, and maybe I'll write some. and Supernatural is one of those worlds that like you can very easily cross it over with just about whatever you want, because it has enough contemporary and it has enough fantasy that you can drop anyone into their world or drop the Winchesters into any other world. I've read Supernatural fanfic where the Winchesters end up on Atlantis and Stargate. So
sometimes they're even dragons. You never know which.
Yeah.
There are dragons in Supernatural too, so that's even canon.
This is true. So if we're thinking about a newbie who is looking at sticking their toe in the water with this massive thing called fan fiction, let's talk about some of the platforms and where it might be easiest and how this works. So, you know, we've got the older ones like LiveJournal. So when we say LJ, we mean LiveJournal. You just have to get past all the Russian advertisements. There's Archive of Our Own, which just won a Hugo a couple of years ago for transformative works. Massive site, also very easy to search. You've got Dreamwidth, which is a little newer of a site. There's fanfiction.net, which is again one of the older sites. And I'm sure there are others as well. Where would you point a person who's new to fan fiction to kind of get their feet wet? Hanna?
I would point them to Archive of Our Own, which we call AO3 as a shorthand, because there's just, so I'm looking at it right now, there are 267,174 works posted on Archive of Our Own in the Supernatural TV show fandom. And so you have a expansive universe to choose from, and there are Archive of Our Own, it makes it easy to search and filter and sort the things that you are looking for so that you read what you want and you can avoid what you don't want. So I think that that's the best way to do it. I have read a fair bit of fanfic on LiveJournal, but mostly I get to it via links from other places, you know, places who like roundups or things like that. I have not found it easy to look for things on LJ in Supernatural or really in any kind of fanfic the way that you can look for what you're looking for on AO3.
There is a thing called SPN Story Finders on LJ. And that's probably the only way I have ever found anything except by direct link, because again, since you can't search well on LJ mechanically, it's actually a human forum where people go, I'm looking for stories like this, or I think I read a story that had thus and so, and then real life people put suggestions together. And I think SPN Story Finder still exists out there. And you can go back through its archives to find not just what's on the front page, but other queries. So it's a rabbit hole in itself, but just going out on LJ and going, I think I'll find something. No, not for the faint of heart or the novice. Melissa?
AO3 is to me the easiest. I used to be comfortable with LJ, but then when Facebook became a thing and Russians took over LJ, I left. And so I don't know all the bells and whistles on LJ anymore. AO3 is really easy for somebody who's new. I've only been reading fanfic for about a year and a half now on AO3. And when I first started, it took me like 2 days to figure it out. And I was like, oh man, this is great. I can find, if the author has tagged the work appropriately, I can find anything I'm looking for and I can avoid the stuff that I don't want to read. So I say, if you're new, go to AO3.
And we'll talk about tags next, but platforms, JL.
I've been part of Archive of Our Own since you had to like request a membership. I've been like, I was reading fic on Archive of Our Own when it was possible to read literally all of a fandom's fic like and like a big fandom, not like a niche fandom. So it's been a while. I actually, just because I was curious, I did a search. There are 9 Supernatural Old Guard crossovers, so I'll have to check those out. And it's fascinating, you know, because I think Archive of Our Own has grown up to kind of like be complementary to the way people use the internet itself, which is why tags is really cool. And just even, you know, the search function that I use to specifically look for, you know, Old Guard as a fandom and Supernatural as a fandom, but specifically the Old Guard, the movie, you know, just because it has that functionality and you can find exactly what you want, you know, makes it the easiest place to start. That being said, like, you know, you're gonna miss out sometimes, because obviously that's not the only place that fanfic is in the world. So you do have to be willing to be like, oh, well, this person recommended this link to me, so I should go read it there too.
Okay, Carole.
Excuse me, I'm fairly old guard LJ. I was on LJ years before I was in Supernatural fandom. So I've been on LJ like longer than we would like to think about. And because of that, I'm very, very comfortable on it. I absolutely agree that for the new reader, AO3 is marvelous because it is so well laid out. It is so well categorized and quantified and sorted and everything. But LiveJournal, there has a couple of things that that are difficult to replicate elsewhere. One is the whole AO3 is where you post your stories, and there are comments, and you can have a discussion in comments. LJ is a blog site, so LJ's thrust was writing your own blog and talking about stuff and getting in discussions with people and making friends, and you would go to a friend frenzy and meet new people and all of that kind of stuff. So what LJ's strength was building the fandom on this very personal friend-to-friend level. You cannot get that on AO3. AO3 is excellent for the readership. I generally still kind of post like a master post on LJ for those who are still there, but then I do actually post the bulk of, you know, my actual works on AO3. If you're navigating LiveJournal, the 2 big things that you can do is, if you're following a writer or you want to see more about a writer, you can go to that writer's LJ. My LJ is Fire Sign 10. So if you said, I would like to see more about Fire Sign 10 stories, you can go to the AO3 list, but you can also go to my LJ, Fire Sign 10, and see my stories and see me talking about my stories. And maybe I talk about how it was writing my story, or, you know, this kind of thing. And you kind of get that actual, more personal, in-depth perspective on perhaps what that writer is writing. You also have writers that predate LJ, or for one reason or another are not, that predate AO3, and for one reason or another are not on AO3. And so sometimes you got to bite the bullet and go there, because otherwise you could be missing some really, really great stories. The second thing, I'm sorry if I'm going too long, but the second thing about LJ is that it hosts a number of fandom events. So fandom often has writing events. They're usually called bangs or a challenge. One of the very best known is an annual challenge called the Supernatural / J2 Big Bang. Big Bang means you have to write over 20,000 words. We're talking, these stories are 21,000 words to like 120,000 words, okay? So big range. The writer has several months to write their story. They get blind picked by an artist, so they get some art with their story, and then the stories are posted in a particular range of time. So what you can do is, there's many, many, many of these bangs, okay? There's bangs specific to a ship. There are bangs specific to a style. It might be a horror bang. It might be a romance bang. We used to have a bang that was based on Harlequins. So you could write a Wincest Harlequin story or a J2 Harlequin story. There's
We broke Melissa.
Disney stories. You could redo Disney stories. One bang that's a fairly newer one that I really liked is called the Eldritch Bank, and it's Sam and Dean, and it's horror. You can write. There's case fiction. I mean, so when you go to LJ, each of these bangs has a community. So you can go to the Big Bang community, and they will have master lists. So they will have, here's all the big bangs from 2005 through, I literally myself just typed up the list for the 2022,000 bang. It has not been posted yet in the community, but it should be shortly because I just sent it to the moderator. And you can go to these communities and have these master lists of story links that are a veritable treasure trove.
Yeah.
And it's a tremendous resource. So even if you're nervous about navigating LJ as an entity, and to be honest, it's not the lively place it used to be. A lot of people have migrated into various other social medias and stuff, but it still hosts a lot of this. So you can follow the writers, you can follow the bangs, and those are reasonably easy for even a novice to do. Because most of those are tweeting their master links, so you can be on Twitter, you can be on Tumblr, you can be in a reading group. There are several fit group reading groups on Facebook, and people will be posting those links, and you can say, oh, the Big Bang list for 2022 is up. I'm going to go check those stories out. And that's a really great resource, I think, in addition to AO3.
Yeah, lots of the bangs are cross-posted onto AO3, but not all of them. So.
Yeah,
exactly. I personally cross-post everything because I know AO3 is so, findable, searchable. You can download on AO3. You can download movies, ebooks, PDFs, whatever you want. And people do that a lot. And that's great. But because I've been on LJ so long, and like I say, many of these bangs are hosted there, I always at least post my master post, which is the story and the description of my story, the topic, the pairing, the word count, all that kind of stuff, and then the link that will take you to it to read it on AO3.
And the combo of the artwork and the story works better on LJ than it does on AO3.
Yeah. Well,
that is another nice thing about LJ.
It doesn't really have to. I mean, if I put my art into LJ and then I upload it to AO3, it's fine. If people are not doing that properly, that's when you go to AO3 and it's like, can't show the art, or on an older story, the problem is that the art will be on an older service that no longer functions. And then you're like, oh, well, but it's possible to just put your art in there so that, yes, you can see it just as the writer intended.
Well, and it's important, when you get into fan fiction to at least be aware that some of these other platforms exist, because as you said, not every author posts on every platform. Some of the older fiction, especially for authors who aren't posting anything new anymore, they left the fandom, they left fan fiction, they passed away. Their stuff may only exist on some of the older platforms like fanfiction.net, which is, again, harder to search, really tiny type, but there's a lot of good stuff out there. There was a big migration back when Russia invaded Ukraine because there was fear that Russia would partition its servers and might make LJ, which it now owns, inaccessible to the West. So there was kind of this rescue effort that was really cool as all of these authors sort of formed a human chain to ferry all these stories to Dreamwidth or AO3, especially the ones that had been orphaned and didn't have an owner. And it was this kind of like a bucket brigade.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But it's, it preserved a lot of fiction in case LiveJournal became inaccessible, which so far it hasn't. And I think, the other thing that came up is with the tagging, it's rule 34. If something exists, there's porn of it on the internet. So whether that is crossover porn or just somebody being very innovative, It's there. So this is why we say mind the
Mind
tag.
the tag.
Tag.
Let's talk about tagging. Melissa.
Tagging has two reasons. If you're a writer, you tag for two reasons. You tag because you want to draw readers in because there's something in your story that they might be looking for, or content warnings. Both of those are important. It just, if a writer is writing something that I don't read, I look at the tags and I'm like, nope, I won't read that. I won't read anything about infidelity. That's one of my hard stops. I won't read it. So if there's an infidelity tag, I will save that author, because in AO3 you have a way to follow authors. I'll follow that author because now I know I can trust them, that they're going to tag something that I don't want to read. So that gives them credit in my bank. I might not read that particular story, but they've probably got other stories that I'm interested in reading. So be mindful of your tags authors, because you can search really easily on AO3 for different things. Like if you want Vampire Dean tonight, you can search for Vampire Dean. The flip side is there are some authors who will use tags ridiculously. I can't believe this isn't a tag, or like, come on, really? Your tags are your way to advertise and market your work. When you put stuff like, how is this not a tag? Or that's not helpful.
Or have
Not
100
helpful.
tags when they're really just being funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of like the ones who are clever in their tags.
But there's a limit though.
There's a limit.
Yeah.
But so there's a couple different categories of tags, right? So there's relationship tags, there's character tags, there's ratings tags, right? So like a movie rating, general audiences, teen and up, mature audiences, explicit. And then there's, relationship tags like MM, FF, MF, like the relationship pairing. And then there's sort of like topical tags like infidelity, or porn with plot, or porn without plot, or the various kinds of sex acts that you might be looking for or not looking for. So the tagging is one of the things that, particularly on AO3, is just so delightful, because there are established tags that AO3 has created as like kind of standard tags that are kept track of, and they show up when you start typing in for your story, and then you can just create random new tags all kinds of ways. And so some of those can be really fun. And so you can include tags or exclude tags, which is, I think, really, really helpful. So if you want to read a story that's explicit, that is with Sam and Dean together, that has a mention of Charlie Bradbury, but does not include infidelity, you can filter yourself down to those stories. And I don't know how many of those stories are, because I haven't done that search yet, but those are sort of some of the ways that you can navigate the tags.
Okay. Carole.
Yeah, as a writer, I want to tag, like Melissa said, to draw people in. I want to put out what's in my story so that people who are looking for those relationships or whatever. So if I write an angsty story, I want to make sure I got angst, sweet hot, slow burn. I mean, and as Anna said, you can often start typing and you get a whole drop down menu of different things. So I want to tag for content because I want people to come read my story. I want to use warning tags because I don't want, if I have a story that has potentially triggering subject matter, dub-con, non-con, mention of past violence, graphic violence, things like that, those are very triggering for people. And I want to use those so that people are not they don't go in blind, and then halfway through the story they're like, oh my god, and here's this event, and now they're going to have their own flashbacks and whatever for like the next month. I mean, nobody wants that. They don't want it, I don't want it. You know, that's not my goal. My goal is to entertain and that kind of thing, not, you know, freak you out. So warning tags are very important. Sometimes there's a big debate. The conflict for a writer can be, I have a plot twist. I'm starting down Avenue A, but at some point I'm going to take, you know, Avenue B. And if you tag for that, you're like, I'm going to possibly ruin my surprise here. On the other hand, depending on what that change is, for instance, something that's very, very polarizing, like major character death, that's a big tag. A lot of people do not want to read major character death. They're not out there to read how their, you know, loved one, you know, tanks it. So, but you're like, oh, if I put that in, it's really going to spoil my surprise. But if I don't put it in, I'm going to get a lot of angry people. And you have to judge what's, you know, how you're going to play that. And they're not all that large and dramatic, but I picked that as an example because that's a very large and dramatic example. So, you know, warning tags are important. You've got to decide how you're going to handle if you have some kind of plot twist or surprise. Are you going to tag it? And just be aware, man, if you don't tag it, you're gonna catch some flack, you know, because there are going to be people who say, that is not what I was in this story for. You sprung this on me and I don't appreciate it.
I've seen some fics while prepping for this panel. I was reading fic to prep for this panel. Yeah, let's go with that. Some write it, same thing. They don't want to spoil the surprise, but at the same time, they want to make sure that readers who need that warning or whatever that warning is, get it. They'll put in the notes at the top, see the, you know, blah, blah, blah. There's something ahead that you might need to know about, but I'm not going to put it in the tags. Click to the notes at the bottom of the page, you know, at your own risk kind of thing. I love it when authors do that, because if I don't know if I don't know the author, I read the end of the story. Like I read the first paragraph or two, and if I'm interested, I go read the end because I'm only interested in happily ever after. That's my thing. I don't want sad endings. It's just not what I'm here for. So if I don't know it's an author who always writes happy endings, I'm just gonna read that. Kitty, stop. I'll just read the end. I'm done.
There's actually even tags that will say, I wrote a story with major character death, and it was a twist because then at the end something happens that's not the case. But I knew if I put on the tag major character death, it's going to kill the readership in half easily.
But I've seen temporary character death.
Yes.
Temporary character death. There's also
yeah.
character death, HEA, which means happy ever after, which means you might go through character death, but you're still going to get your happy ever after ending. And that's that reassurance to people. I'm not going to rip your heart out, you know, without putting it back in.
Right. Angst with a happy ending is another one like that. Right. Yeah.
So there's ways to deal with that. Absolutely.
Sometimes there's also a author has chosen not to use. And
that's kind of a warning right there, because then you're like, you know what, if AO3 has some built-in warning tags, graphic violence, rape, underage, there's like 5 of them. But then the other choice chooses not to use any of those warnings. So if they deliberately choose not to use any of those warnings, you're probably going to run into one of those things in there at least. And that there in itself is the warning.
Maybe not. Like you can't know for sure. You can't know for sure.
You can't know for sure, but you
not to use the tag that won't be in there. But just because the author chose not to use that tag doesn't mean that those warnings. No, it doesn't mean it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it does mean maybe just be cautious.
It puts the impetus on the reader as opposed to on the author.
Yeah.
So Gail, what about you and tags?
I think that, like, what you guys have all said, I totally agree with. The other thing that I really like about tagging is how it can kind of like a culture, like fandoms can kind of end up with their own language in terms of like the tags that are used, which I just find fascinating from like a weird writerly community sociological, just in terms of everything from like how, because in AO3 you can tag the specific relationship, like this fandom will have a Dean Castiel relationship, but then in like the other tags it'll say like Destiel or whatever, however you pronounce that one. And then and that just means something to the people who are reading it. In Old Guard fandom, there's two characters. One's name is Booker and the other is Niall, and a lot of people ship them, and so that tag is the Book of Niall. And it's just, stuff like that. I actually, in one story that is not finished, I actually ran into a little bit of trouble, I guess, not trouble in reality, but like I kind of used like I limit myself to like 2 or 3 goofy tags that just kind of like, this is the vibe of the story, but not going overboard. And the one I used was had the term murder husbands in it, because part of the point of the story was 2 basically widows who are just like, having kind of a bad time, and they take it out by going and being vigilantes. And I had no idea that murder husbands was like a ship name in the Hannibal fandom.
I haven't done that either.
I had no idea. I've never even seen an episode of Hannibal, much less read any of the fic. And somebody pointed that out to me, and I was like, oh, but the tag wasn't just Murder Husbands; it was Murder Husbands World Tour. So I was like, I'm gonna leave it.
Yeah, I mean, if you are venturing into fan fiction, get acquainted with urbandictionary.com, because you will learn things. Some of them you might be interested to learn. Some of them are cautionary tales, but you will learn things. I think one of my favorite tags is "Dead Dove Do Not Eat."
Yeah.
You bring that one up.
I think that comes from X-Files or something, where somebody actually had a dead dove in something in the refrigerator in the break room, and it said "Dead Dove Do Not Eat," and then somebody was upset that they opened it and there was a dead dove. But that's basically a warning that this is not for the faint of heart. Proceed at your own risk.
And well, it also means I have tagged this. So the tags are there. If you ignore the tags and you go read this and then you complain, it's on you.
Oh yeah.
So if you've tagged something like, okay, so for instance, serial killers, which I'm totally, real life, fine, but you know what, fiction serial killers, I can't do. But anyway, so if you say this fiction is about serial killers and there's blood play and there's this, that, and then you say "Dead Dove Do Not Eat," people do not get to read the story and then come back to you and say, what was with all the serial killing and blood play? That was the "Dead Dove Do Not Eat."
Well, and Carole has heard me rant at least once about somebody who did not tag accurately, whether they were trying to draw a broader audience or whether I don't know, but they did one of those big plot twists, and they led us to believe there was going to be a happily ever after, and 52 chapters in, they said, oops, no happily ever after.
Well, it's like I read a fic on Sunday that it was like, major character death, this is a tragedy, people die, like all of the tags were there. I knew going into it, and I read the story and I cried and I was in a bad mood the rest of the day, and it was really good, but that is all on me, damn it. Like I knew what I was getting into.
That was the "Dead Dove Do Not Eat." It was there, you chose it, and when that's fine, because sometimes you want to read, I read this beautiful, beautiful Sam and Dean fic one time where Sam is a vampire, Dean is a hunter. They're together for years. Dean ages, Sam doesn't. Dean finally starts getting, some dementia and stuff. And you know what? So I knew there was a marriage, but it was tagged major character death. But I tell you what, that story was gorgeous.
Oh yeah, and I read that story because I adore the author, but
I was so happy I read it, but I knew going into it that was what was going to happen.
Right, and that was my beef with the one that I ran.
Yeah,
because it was tagged.
It always crops up every once in a while. There'll be some story that everybody's starts reading, you know, from a bang maybe or something, and everybody's reading it, and then it's like, whoa, and then there's a big discussion about, you know, should they have tagged, shouldn't they have tagged? And personally, I don't want to, it's every writer's individual choice. I, as a writer, don't want to, you know, say that my story is about puppy dogs and then, you know, slip a basilisk in there. You know, I just, so.
I want to get back to Jael's comment about tags that are part of a particular fandom and a way of communicating within the fandom of readers. And so one of them, as Melissa points out, is John Winchester's A+ parenting.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Is a tag that we in the supernatural fandom know exactly what that means. Right? That story may be explicit, it may be general, it may be all kinds of things, it may have major character death or not, it might be other tags, but John Winchester's A+ parenting means something very specific in this fandom. Another one is case fic, right? So case fic is a story that is set within Sam and Dean investigating a case, and it could mean any pairing, it could mean any level of heat, it could mean all kinds of things, but it is a story that is set within Sam and Dean investigating a case. Canon typical violence is another supernatural specific tag.
It's not anymore. Canon typical
violence. Oh, is it not? Is it
yeah. Oh yeah.
But in supernatural, we do know what this means. This means that there's gonna be violence in it.
I see show level violence. That's usually what I use, is show level violence.
Oh, I see canon typical violence, but that will work too,
right?
I genuinely thought
you know how much blood you're going to see. I'm sorry.
I genuinely thought canon typical violence was like a generic fanfic tag at this point, because like I write in a fandom where people like are immortal and can die in horrible ways and still be okay. So like the whole major character death, temporary character death thing is really important in my fandom.
Yeah. So and I think some of these start out in one fandom and then migrate to others. So like the Omegaverse started out in supernatural fandom and then migrated to outside of that to.
And we're so proud.
So these are ways of writers in the fandom communicating with the fans about the kinds of stories that you're looking for or not looking for.
Well, and what I think is really interesting is there are so many writers who have come up through fan fiction. And, you know, for a while there, fan fiction was very stigmatized and people didn't want to admit that. And now, hey, AO3 won a Hugo Award. Bite me. So
that's a tag, bite me.
People are claiming
for Vamp Dean.
And talking very much about their apprenticeship in fanfic. And so I've seen the tagging conventions come over to published work in Amazon, where there are a couple of authors in particular. I looked at their book blurb and it was like, oh, I know where you've been. And I messaged them and said, you came up through fan fiction, didn't you? It's like, yep, guilty as charged. But I think it's an improvement in many ways because of that specificity that we have in fan fiction, where don't want to read something, get triggered by something, not in the mood for something, you can easily, as long as the author has been honest, you can easily avoid that. And that's really a wonderful thing, especially when you're having a bad day and the last thing you need is a story that makes it worse.
Yeah, you want to buffer something, sure. I think it's actually a credit to the incredible range of fan fiction that let's say if you just even want to focus on Sam and Dean, okay, and yet what you can do with them is limitless. I've read some fabulous, and you mentioned the crossovers, I believe, Gail. I've read Firefly crossovers. I've read and I'm dying to write one, and NCIS crossovers. I wrote a supernatural white collar crossover. I mean, it really lends itself to so much, but even without the crossovers, you have Canon and then you have AU, and it gives you everything. And I think the tagging then comes into place so that you can narrow your search and you can refine your reading, but it also speaks to the sheer breadth and volume of the creative works out there.
Mhm.
you know, and so it's staggering. It's just staggering.
So let's
I wrote a crossover fic, Supernatural and Flowers in the Attic.
And it was
I might be the only
wonderful.
one.
I loved it. It was
I might be
marvelous.
the only one who did that particular crossover.
I need that fic.
We've got Walker and Supernatural.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Walker and the boys.
And the boys.
Kind of us now, and Big Sky is showing up now. Let's touch real quickly on other terms that show up: canon, head canon, and fanon,
Fix it.
and fix it. So who wants to jump in on that? Come on.
Well,
Well,
like,
I always will, but I'm like trying to be polite and let other people talk.
I've watched up through the middle of season 13 of Supernatural, and of course I got the ending spoiled, and so I'm not really in a rush to watch it. But the amazing thing about fanfic is that you can, like, that doesn't necessarily have to be the only ending. And there's a million possibilities out there.
Curtain fic.
As someone who started in fanfic in the Highlander fandom, there's a really significant major character death at the end of season 5. And that was like fanfic exploded at that point, to the point that there was even a really cool, like, the fanfic version of season 6, where basically everything got rewritten so that this character didn't die. And so Fix It has been, alive and well in fanfic for decades.
Yeah.
And
So
fix it fiction is usually the fans coming in to deal with a dropped plot thread, to deal with a plot hole, to, as I often say, womansplain what was really going on that the characters did not have words for.
I love that.
Or just something that is left unfinished and never come back to, that has
Samulet.
the Samulet.
Amulet.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so fix it is a big thing. And as you mentioned, alternate endings, those get called curtain fic, hanging curtains,
Alternate endings are not always curtain fix.
No.
Okay.
But
Just making
it
it.
is no, there can be many other kinds, but curtain fic is a specific sort of
Yes.
alternate ending where the characters kind of go off and have a happily ever after, usually doing something alternative.
Yeah. And the headcanon is something that may not be explained in the canon, in the show itself, but may be your interpretation of something. And so there's a couple different ways that you could have headcanons. You could have headcanons that are about relationships. So a personal headcanon of mine is that Dean and Benny had a relationship in purgatory, like a relationship.
Headcanon accepted.
Yes.
I think the thing with headcanon is it's very specific to oneself. Now, you may find people who share your headcanon. For instance, I guess I really never thought that much about Dean and Benny, but it certainly would make sense. So I could definitely share your headcanon about that. Fanon is a more widely held, fan-wide held belief.
So like the voicemail, that at some point,
Right.
Sam and Dean will have a conversation and Sam will not be left hanging forever with that voicemail
Right.
in the beautiful room right before he kills Lilith, and still thinking Dean thought he was a monster and wanted to kill him. That never
Right.
gets
And that,
resolved.
and that can be widely held by many people. So that's kind of your difference between headcanon, which starts in your head, but can be shared, and fanon, which is kind of a more widely, shared and held belief or train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
What about AU? There's a lot of AU out there.
That's like a whole nother show.
That's
So there's a bit of a difference, right? So there's AU, which is stories that are set within the alternate universes that are in Supernatural. So the Apocalypse world, right, would count as, if you wrote a story set within Apocalypse world, that would technically count as AU because it's kind of a within show alternate universe. But typically AU means Sam and Dean are baristas in a coffee shop.
It's a coffee shop.
One of them is an artist and the other is a lawyer, or maybe not lawyer because Sam was training to be a lawyer, but one of them is an artist and the other's a investment banker, right? So AU is taking these characters from the show that we know so much and keeping some of the core characteristics of the characters, the ones that make them those people, and then putting them in a completely different setting that has nothing to do with the show itself. Coffee shops, high schools, colleges, sports teams. I read a really great fanfic that's a J2 story where they're both NFL football players.
Yes.
Both quarterbacks.
Yeah, quarterback.
And
That was good.
it's long, but it is amazing. And I'm not a football fan, like not at all. And I loved it.
I read a great one where Sam and Dean were competitors on The Voice.
What?
It sounds kooky, but oh my God, it was great. There's also canon divergent, which means a story can start in canon, but then as the story progresses, it veers out of canon, perhaps into an AU, you know, but it means at least you're starting off in that world, and then it takes another, you know, it goes another direction.
So I read a really good canon divergent story where in seasons 3 and 4, Dean refused to be tempted into doubting Sam and just said, I'm with you all the way. If it's demon blood, if it's boy king of hell, I'm beside you. Let's just fix it. And so the angels never got their wedge between them. We never had the apocalypse. That made all the difference, but it was canon compliant up to about, you know, the middle of season 3. And it would often they'll say canon compliant through episode whatever.
Yeah.
And then it'll verge off. And those are a lot of fun too, especially if there were things in canon that didn't float your boat.
Yeah, like, you know, it's fascinating that you guys are talking, like, primarily we're talking about a television show that's 15 seasons long, and my fandom brain is very stuck in a 2-hour long movie. And there's like, all of these things are still possible with both, but like a really common one in Old Guard fandom is like up to like, except for the post-credit scene, you know, and stuff like that. So, you know, just the possibilities in terms of where things can split is fascinating. And that goes for every fandom.
Or an entire fic based on a post-credit scene. I bet that there is multiple stories about the scene where at the end of the credits where Jensen is singing Eye of the Tiger on top of the Impala. I'm 100% sure that there's fanfic, that there's a story that involves that.
Headcanon accepted.
Well, and where sometimes fandoms get in trouble is when people forget something is headcanon or fanon and pick a hill to die on something that was never official. You kind of have to know, especially if you really, really love something that is headcanon or fanon, it will never be official unless it is shown in the actual canon. So you can love it, you can write it, you can create it, but please don't kill anybody over it because it isn't official. That sometimes needs to be said. People get very passionate.
Yes, there's pairings that are not canon, and there's events that are not canon, and you can write all the stories you want, and you can write all the stories about the pairings that you want, but
even if we go back to the John Winchester A+ parenting, even that can be, you know, you've got the fact that you've got people that think that he was terrible, he was abusive, he was neglectful. I know. And then you've got people who are like, you know, he did the wrong things, but he wasn't doing them because he was evil or bad. He was just like floundering and a single father. And you know what I mean? So even there is like, you know.
Well, and then you get Jeffrey Dean Morgan straight out and says, I believe John always loved his boys. So that's his headcanon as the character. Melissa?
In the kink community, there's a saying, your kink may not be my kink, but your kink is okay. And that's the same thing with all of this headcanon, fanon stuff. It's like, just because I don't like a particular pairing and I don't see it in canon, doesn't mean that somebody else shouldn't write it, shouldn't love it, shouldn't enjoy it. There are people who are going to be very horrified at my ships. That's okay. Just let me have my ships. You have your ships, enjoy them. Just because your thing isn't my thing doesn't mean either of them are wrong. And sometimes as fans, we get so entrenched with, I love blah, everybody should love blah, and blah is the only way to go. No, it's creative writing. Write whatever you want to write, love whatever you want to love, and don't judge people. Take off the robes. You're not Judge Judy.
And this is fiction. This, as much as we love them, this is fiction.
Yeah.
So, you know, imposing real life trauma on people is wrong. Don't do that, especially over fiction.
Yes.
Oh, well, folks, we have blown through our time. You're right. We could talk about this, and we probably will talk about this again in other ways. But thank you so much for being here. Let's go around, and if you want to let people know where to find you online, please do. JL?
Again, I'm Gail Gribble. I write urban fantasy, alternate history. My book, the first book in the series is Steel Victory. Steel Empire series is coming to a close probably next year. I'm working on it. And in my not copious amounts of spare time, I sometimes write old guard fanfic. And like I said, I guess now I have to get some cred and write some supernatural fanfic. The closest I've come so far is that I did fan cast Jared Padalecki as one of the main characters in my book. So I guess maybe that counts somehow.
The show that launched 1,000 ships, yes. Carole?
I'm Carole M. Stokes on Facebook, where I'm on my Facebook. I'm a lot in the TFW NC, Team Free Will NC group that Gail runs. I'm on many continuum panels. On Twitter, I am true_firesign10, and all of my fanfic is on AO3 under firesign10.
Hanna?
I can be found at my website, annakensing.com, on TikTok at Anna Kensing Books, and the few, not very many pieces of fanfic that I have on AO3 are under A Kensing.
Cool. Melissa?
I can be found stalking writers on AO3 under Bia_Deans_girl. And I also, same handle on Twitter. I occasionally throw a J2 headcanon out there every once in a while. They're usually imagined conversations from the boys based on something I've seen online or some photo or some conversation with my cohorts.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com, all my social media, and I'm on pretty much everything is some variation of those names, so spell them right and you'll find me. I do run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook. I'm a staff columnist for the Winchester Family Business, so I write opinion pieces and reviews of, lately I've been reviewing Walker. But mostly you can find me here on Continual. So thank you all very, very much. This has been a lot of fun. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon on Continual. So we'll see you online.